Hey everybody, so this week we are going to be working on homophones. Okay, so there are homophones, homonyms, homographs. I know it all sounds crazy, but we're just going to focus this week on homophones because they are all very different, all of those different categories. So homophones can be tricky. What I put here to start off is a book. It's one of my favorite books. It's called Dear Dear. If you've never read it before, look it up on YouTube. You can listen to it. And you'll see by the end of this presentation what would be in that book. So first we're going to start off with what are homophones. All right. Now, if you just look at the word homophones, that the part in there, phones, when you think of phones, you think, okay, I'm talking on the phone, I'm hearing. So it has to do with sound. So a homophone is a word that is pronounced the same as another word, but differs in meaning. A homophone may also differ in spelling. So that word pronounced, okay, that's how you say it. So it's how it sounds. So that's why I like that, homophones, the phones part kind of gives you a clue, right? Remember when we talked about clues? So it can also differ in spelling. So this is an example, flu and flu. Okay, when I just read these two words, they sound exactly the same, right? But they are spelled differently and mean totally different things, right? The first one, the lady has the flu, right? A terrible sickness. And number two, flew, that bird flew, right? And that flu part is actually past tense. That goes into what we were talking about last week's lesson, okay, and the spelling of that word. So, why is it important to know homophones? Well, it's important because when you're using in your writing, you want to make sure that you are using the correct words. So everything that you're writing makes sense. All right, because if I'm reading out loud, you might not know the word that I'm using, right? You can't tell that if it's correct or not. But if I'm reading your writing, I'm going to be able to tell if it's spelled differently. Okay, so that is what homophones are. You look at two words, they're usually spelled differently, mean totally different things, but they sound exactly the same. So here are some examples. So the top part, I am using red paint, R-E-D, and I read a book on the train, R-E-A-D. And that one's fun because if you look at the word read, that can also be read, right? Like I read a book. All right, but that is not a homophone. That's a whole different story. So these two words are homophones if you read it like this, red, red, and red. All right, the bottom ones, we have an ant in the kitchen, and my aunt gave me some flowers. Okay, A-N-T and A-U-N-T. That's a mistake that I see a lot, when somebody's talking about their aunt and their cousins. Sometimes it's spelled the first way, and you're like, oh, nope, you're missing a letter in there. It means something totally different, like you have a little ant visiting you, right? Like a bug. So you just have to be careful in the ways of your spelling. So there are over 7,000 homophones in the English language, which is kind of crazy, but true, right, to think about, because homophones are sometimes something that you don't think about while you're using them. But if you go back and you check and you're editing your work, you might realize that you're using them incorrectly and you weren't even aware of it. Okay, so that's just a little fun anecdote that I put in there for you to know that there are a lot of them in our language, which also is important to note can be tricky when you are trying to learn the English language. Okay, so if you are newer to the English language or you know somebody that is learning English, it can be very tricky to know that we have all of these really confusing words that sound the same but mean things that are totally different. So this page is important because I wanted to go over the most commonly misused homophones that, again, you might not realize are homophones, but they're kind of the trickiest ones because, again, they're spelled so similarly, but not exactly the same, but they mean totally different things. So the first section I'll go over is your and your. So your being a possessive pronoun, so remember possessing means that you own that. So an example, your homework needs to be turned into the tray. The other way you could do your is with a contraction, right? So with that apostrophe, you're going to need to study for your science test. Okay, remember a contraction is two words together. So your would be you are. You are going to need to study for your science test. All right. So if I'm saying those two sentences out loud, you might not realize that I'm spelling the word your different. But when you see them written like this, you can see that it makes a real difference on which one you are using. All right. The one directly under it, I'll go over now, there's three of them. So there, and there. Okay. This one kind of can make our head spin. And there's also some fun books on this specific homophone as well. So the first one is there, and that's a preposition telling where something is. So please lay the bananas over there on the table. Okay. And I like to remember this correct homophone as in it has the word here in it. Okay. Like here and there. So it's basically like when you're placing something, like say, oh, put it over there, or I'm going over there. All right. It has the word here in it. Okay. Like it's right here. This one is tricky. THEIR. That is a possessive pronoun, so similar to the your up here. That shows ownership. So after playing in the mud, their clothes were filthy. Okay, meaning it was their clothes that were filthy, the ones that they were wearing. The last one is a contraction, similar to the top one with your. THEY apostrophe RE. A contraction for they are, so they're going to start a band. Okay, to make sure that you're using the right one, you would break it up and say they are going to start a band. Okay, yes, that makes sense. So I know that I'm using the correct one. All right, moving on to this top part, 2, 2, and 2. Okay, not talking about like ballerinas and their tutus. Okay, these are three different homophones that mean different things. So to, to, preposition that tells a direction. So the man needs to park his car better. She is going to the airport. The next one is the number word. You guys all know, right? To, TWL. So there were 2 hamburgers left after dinner. TOO is a synonym for also. All right, so he wants to get an A on his spelling test too. You can replace that TOO with also, and that would make perfect sense, right? He wants to get an A on his spelling test also. All right, so again, if you're not really sure about like what homophone goes where, you can kind of insert those, synonyms in order to see like, oh, does that make sense? The last one I'll go over that is commonly misused are its and its. All right, so the first one, ITS, a possessive pronoun that shows ownership. So the toy will need its batteries changed after 2 months. And it's as in a contraction for it is. So that has the apostrophe in it. It's supposed to snow today. So you see what I did there with the little parentheses to break it up. It is supposed to snow today. All right, so you might want to come back to this when you're working on your document, if you're not sure and about the to and there. This might help you, this little infographic, to remember which one works in which scenario, because these are definitely the trickiest homophones. All right, but we're going to go over a few more. So this sentence, if I saw as in, I want to live in a house where I can blank the clear blue blank. Now, those 2 blanks are going to sound exactly the same. So the word that I'm looking for is see. So I want to live in a house where I can see the clear blue sea. So what you would want to do, like say you had a word bank, you want to look at the 2 spellings of see and figure out where they go. So I'm going to show you. The first one would be spelled S-E-E. The second one would be S-E-A. All right, so the first one is see, like I'm seeing something, right, with my eyes. And the next example is like the ocean. Okay, so that's a synonym for ocean, sea and ocean. So this can be tricky. Now you might think like, why wouldn't I just write ocean, right? This is just, an interesting way that you can use homophones in your writing, right? That it kind of sounds cool. Even poetry, it's cool to use homophones because they make it flow and, that things sound nice since they sound the same. But again, this is just an example of where it can be tricky if you're trying to use it in your writing to make sure that you use the correct ones. Because if I were to flip-flop these words, it would not make any sense if I'm looking at it. Okay? When I'm listening to it, it might make sense, but it doesn't look right. So I just had to insert this beautiful picture right here that we can all take a break and just look at how gorgeous this is, because this would be a definite sight that I would want to see, right? If I was going to buy a house. This is beautiful. Not exactly sure where this was. I just kind of looked up beautiful house by the beach. So we can all kind of just take a moment and look at that. Beautiful. But again, example of I want to see the beautiful sea, right, when I'm looking out my window. All right, we'll get back to reality here. So another example, the vine had grown up against the brick wall of the building. Okay, and I inserted a little picture for each one of these just to help out with some context clues here. So these are vines, okay? So I need to figure out which one. So the first word is grown, as in like, ugh, like I don't want to do this, right? And the next one is grown, like something is growing. So that is the one that I would choose. The vines were growing against, they had grown against the brick wall. All right, so as I go through these, I'm going to kind of pause so you can figure out as we're going through, like, ooh, which one would you pick? And then we'll see if you're correct. So for the next one, he went there after he finished his science homework. So remember, this is one of those tricky ones where there's 3 of them. So I'm going to give you a second, see if you can insert which one would make the most sense. All right, and hopefully you went with there, right? Because that is, he went there, he went somewhere, okay, after he finished his homework. Okay, the other 2 wouldn't make sense. If you looked at the contraction, and remember you would break that up like they are, right? He went, they are after he, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So that's kind of, process of elimination when you're doing something like this. All right, we'll do the next one. I had to wait forever at the hospital to see a doctor concerning my broken arm. That's never fun when you have to sit in the hospital or sit in the waiting room, right? So give you a second. Which one? All right, and this one would be wait, as in W-A-I-T, as in you needed to wait. All right. The next one, W-E-I-G-H-T, is, well, you might get that taken at a doctor's office or a hospital, right? Get your weight taken. That is if you're like stepping on a scale or you're trying to weigh something. That would be that spelling. The next one, in the nursery rhyme, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Now, we're all probably familiar with this one, right? Which pail, see the picture up here, that's when they're tumbling down, the pail. So which one would be the correct version of pail? And hopefully you went with the first one, P-A-I-L. Okay, that's like a pail of water. The next one is pale, P-A-L-E. Like, if your skin tone is like a lighter skin tone, you might say like, oh, I look pale today, right? Like your skin tone. So that's like a light, or if you're like looking through something and it's very like glassy or transparent, you might say it's pale. So that would be that first one. This one is, it's impossible to eat just one piece of my grandmother's brownies. Brownies are one of my favorite things in the world to make and eat, of course. So which word would be correct for piece? This is another one that, I see commonly misused a lot. It can be tricky. And hopefully you went with the second one, piece, P-I-E-C-E. That is a piece of something, okay? And again, this is one of those tricky with spellings. If you've ever heard the little anecdote of I before E except after C, so that's how you know the spelling, that the I goes before the E when you're spelling the word peace. Okay, the first piece, just a little review, is like peace, like you're saying, you want peace and quiet, or like you're throwing up the peace sign, like you want, everybody to peace out. That would be that example. And this last one we'll do is, I threw in another one of those tricky ones with the your. So it is, do your brothers like playing baseball, or do they prefer basketball? So which one do you think would make the most sense? All right, and it would be this one, Y-O-U-R, because if you did remember the hint I gave you before with the contraction, if you said, do you are brothers like, right, that doesn't sound right, okay? Your ear to your ear, it doesn't make sense. So you know that it would be this one. It's the possession, right? Your brothers, okay? Not saying you own your brothers, right? But it's just, that's what that your means. It shows possession, okay? All right, so after this lesson, you're just going to click out and you're going to go into the ELA section to open up your document to work on the homophones practice. Okay, as always, just reach out to me and let me know if you guys have any questions, and I hope you have a great week.